What if the folks in charge of our economy have been looking at all the wrong numbers? Today, we're diving into the work of an economist who called the 2008 crash when pretty much nobody else saw it coming. And his warning for what's next, well, it's even more serious. Yeah, that's the big claim from Professor Steve Keen. He's not just saying we're in for a little dip. He argues the next crisis is going to be even worse than the one that rocked the entire globe back in 2008. That is a massive statement, so let's see how he actually backs it up. All right, so if we're really heading for trouble, what's the cause? To get Keen's prediction, we kind of have to play detective. We're going to follow the clues he's laid out, clues he says most mainstream economists have just walked right past. So, our investigation kicks off with the usual suspect. The one we always hear about on the news whenever things start looking a little shaky. The official story, the one you hear over and over, always points the finger at government debt. But Keen says that's just a distraction. He thinks the real culprit, the hidden clue that everyone's missing, is private debt. That's the money owed by you, me, and businesses. Just look at the data right before the 2008 crash. Government debt was actually pretty low, but private debt? It had absolutely skyrocketed to a crazy 170% of the entire economy's output. That was the giant mountain of debt that was building up, completely in the background. And get this wasn't some one-off event. The exact same pattern showed up right before the Great Depression back in 1929. Again, government debt was low, and private debt had spiked to these incredibly dangerous levels. You start to see a pattern here, right? So why is this private debt so dangerous? To really get it, we have to challenge a really basic idea about how money itself is even created. And this is where the mainstream story just totally falls apart. The traditional view, what they call loanable funds, basically says that banks are just boring middlemen. They take money from a saver's deposit and then lend that exact same money out to a borrower. It's like they're just passing the money from one person to another. So in this model, a loan is just a transfer. No new money gets made. And because of that, private debt doesn't really have a big effect on the total amount of spending power out there. This one core assumption is what lets mainstream economists pretty much ignore private debt. But Professor Keen says that's a total myth. The reality is something called credit creation. And this is wild. When a bank gives you a loan, it doesn't take money from someone else's savings. It creates a brand new deposit in your account just by typing on a keyboard. It is literally new money created out of thin air. So when that loan is made, the total amount of money in the economy actually goes up. And what do people do when they borrow money? They spend it. This new money is what directly fuels demand for everything, goods, services, and especially assets like houses, which pushes their prices way up. Okay, I know that's a pretty radical theory, but is there any hard data to actually prove it? Well, this is where our detective story finds its smoking gun. Professor Keen says there is this incredibly clear relationship just sitting there in the data. It's a connection so strong that once you see it, it's pretty hard to ignore. And here it is, the correlation between the change in private debt, which is what economists call credit, and the unemployment rate is a jaw-dropping negative 0.93. Now, for anyone who's not a stats nerd, that is insanely close to a perfect inverse relationship. It means that as new borrowing goes up, unemployment falls like a rock. But when that borrowing slows down or goes in reverse, unemployment shoots through the roof. So this isn't just some vague connection. As Professor Keen himself says, this is the kind of statistical relationship that most economists would absolutely kill for. This is the link between the world of finance and the real world of jobs. So you have to wonder, how did everybody miss this? Well, Keen points to a huge economics paper that made a critical mistake. They confused the total level of debt with the change in debt, which is credit. Because of that one error, they concluded credit wasn't important. In fact, their own chart was so flawed it included a mathematical absurdity, implying that new borrowing every year was twice the size of the entire economy. A massive blunder that somehow got past all the editors and experts. So, let's pull all this evidence together. Let's deliver the final verdict in our investigation. What's the big takeaway here? The case is pretty clear. History shows that massive private debt bubbles come right before crashes. The way it happens is through bank lending, which creates new money and pumps up demand. And the proof is that undeniable correlation with unemployment. The verdict? An enormous level of private debt is the key warning sign of a crisis waiting to happen. Which, of course, brings us to today. Right now, U.S. household debt alone, just households, has blown past $18 trillion, and it's still climbing. So, according to Professor Keene's analysis, the warning signs aren't just flashing, they're screaming. The exact same data that predicted 1929 and 2008 is pointing to danger all over again. And the really big question that leaves us with is, are we paying attention this time?